Hello everybody, I'm the introverted astrologer. I'd like to extend a big hello to any new subscribers. Please do feel free to make comments on my videos. I do read all of them, and I am again indebted to those of you who so clearly try to make our online world such a positive and polite place to be. As we start, I'll just bring up the solar return for Trump, which runs from 2024 to 2025. This is the exact moment that the sun returns to the same position in the heavens that it was when Donald was born. You can see two charts in front of you. One uses the Placidus house system and the other one is whole signs, just so that you can choose which one you feel more comfortable with. But they are both based on the same time. And throughout this video, I'll also be consistent in using the reference place of New York, which is where Trump was born. And I am quite happy to do this, because wherever we go, there we are, with the chart we had at birth and all its potentialities. Now, this solar return was one of the many factors I took into account when I arrived at my original decision that this would not be an easy time for Trump. We can see that nasty T-square going on with Saturn, the moon, a stellium with the sun is in the 12th house. And the 12th house is a place of self-undoing, of potential imprisonment, of seclusion and isolation. And this is not the kind of solar return you'd expect to see if we were going to become the next president of the United States. We had previously looked at other measurements as well though, and had an exhaustive dig into the transits, the progressions and solar arcs that Trump would be experiencing during 2024. I will put a summary of those up on the screen for you to look at while I chat about what we'll be investigating today. Now, as we live out our Earth lives, we are under the constraint of time, and we understand time as unfolding in a linear and forward motion. So, for example, our week runs Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and we understand that Monday is before Tuesday. However, astrology is a symbolic tool, and we understand that time can run backwards with equal validity. You could liken this to a stone being thrown into the water at our time of birth. The ripples spread out in concentric circles and are not linear in fashion. There is a strong case for arguing that time is a dimension of our lives on Earth, but we are eternal beings, and in our non-material form, there is no time. Time is simply something that we experience when we incarnate. Dane Rudhyar has written a very good article on this, and I shall put the link in the description of this video. Rudhyar had found that if we go backwards in time, in the progressions, we will find them to be very valid measurements of the events that occur in our life. And in his estimation, he thought there was a more karmic and fated feeling about the events using Converse measurements. And so we are going to step back in time now, and we're going to use the day that Trump was born almost as though it was a mirror reflecting things back to us in reverse. And we can quickly establish the veracity of using this method, because we can calculate that if we were working backwards in time, then Donald Trump would be minus 70 years old in 1876. That is because he's born in 1946. If we take 70 years away from 1946, we get the year of 1876. And so we can cast a solar return for this time, which correlates with the year that Donald Trump was up for the presidential election and was successfully elected. Now, we have Donald's birth chart in the centre, and around the outside of this circle we can see the solar return planets in green. Can we pick up any strong indications of success? Do the solar return planets make strong interaspects with Trump's natal planets? Certainly. We can see that the midheaven of the solar return, our public image, our profession and standing, our reputation out there in the wider world, well, that midheaven point is conjunct with Trump's sun. Mercury is involved too. So we already have that first indication of beaming out our solar identity onto the wider public stage. And there are so many other contacts as well. The solar return node is on the descendant of the solar return, which suggests development of strong partnerships and of connections being made in accordance with our life path. And the solar return Mars is on our natal Mercury, literally firing up our power to deliver strong oratory, to communicate with vigour, incisively, and we can participate fiercely in competitions or debates. We have that extra fiery energy needed to channel our will through our verbal and mental faculties. And we can also see that the solar return Pluto is conjunct the natal midheaven. So we have big transformation of our career or profession. And solar return Jupiter is on the IC, the part of the chart which we would look to for roots, for family and home. This also means that Jupiter is opposing Pluto. And with these two together, we could be looking at this huge drive for self-betterment, for improvement, of very high levels of ambition and an overwhelming desire for power and prosperity. We can see that Saturn and Moon of the solar return are conjunct to each other. We might ordinarily interpret Saturn on the Moon as implying some difficulty, perhaps some alienation, some sad emotions. But critically, this does not make strong contact with Trump's natal planets, aside from a trine with his natal Mercury, and we could therefore deduce that Trump is able to control his emotional expression sufficiently to channel it through well-organised and self-disciplined communication. And I think so far so good. We're establishing that the Converse years where Trump was successful do show up in the Converse solar return. But let's go back in time a little more and look at the Converse solar return for the year when Trump lost the presidential election. This would be when he was 74 years old. And so if we step back in time 74 years before 1946, we arrive at the date of June 1872. And so this is the time in 1872 when the sun returned to the exact same degree that it was in when Donald was born. Once again, the solar return planets are placed around the outside of the charts in green. And this shows a very different year indeed. The ascendant of the solar return is very close to Donald's natal Neptune. Neptune can be confusion, delusion. There can be loss or sacrifice. We can also see that the moon in this solar return is squaring Trump's natal sun, so we have that inherent dissatisfaction and discontent. In fact, that solar return moon is also squaring that stellium of planets in the solar return, the Sun, Mars, Venus, Mercury. So there is great emotional discontent here. And Moon Uranus particularly would speak of disruption, of shocks. What is very notable is the lack of close connection with either the solar return angles or the natal chart angles. We discussed the confusion of the solar return ascendant falling within a few degrees of Donald's natal Neptune. But if we look at the midheaven, Pluto is nearby. This is showing us that Pluto on its own is not sufficient to guarantee success. When Pluto makes these aspects with a particular point or planet in our chart, Pluto's work is exhaustive, intense, and always transformative. Whether that transformation is experienced as a positive or a negative event is very much dependent on what else is going on in the chart. And in this case, we cannot see the intensity or volume of contacts with the angles that we saw in his solar return for 1876. And now we can move further back still and consider what the solar return tells us for this year, for 2024. This is equivalent to the year when Trump turns -78, and it covers a period from June of 2024 right through to June of 2025. And let's have a quick scan and see what we can find on the angles. For a start, the solar return ascendant falls in the 3rd whole sign house. This is a cadent house, and one which we saw in the Converse return covering 2020 too. Now, why is this house so important? We have to consider the natal here. Neptune, Chiron and Jupiter are all stationary direct in the natal chart. This makes these 3 bodies extremely powerful. It tells us that all 3 appeared to be standing still in the sky when Donald was born, and they were about to reverse position after some time of being retrograde. And at this moment, when planets are about to turn direct, they are extremely potent. The Jupiter in that stellium is also in a near exact trine with Donald's natal Uranus, making it an even stronger and more beneficial aspect. So the 3rd house of communication, about conveying our thoughts and opinions to the world around us, is an intrinsic part of Trump's self-expression. I must add that those communications may not always be factually correct, because we do have to take into account that his natal Neptune is in square to his natal Mercury, and this aspect can mean that our communications could be misleading, false or confused. So we can deduce from this conjunction with the solar return ascendant to this part of Trump's chart that Trump is going to be communicating with the world a lot over the coming 12 months. And the body which the solar return ascendant is closest to is that natal Chiron. So it's suggesting that themes of hurting or wounding are key this year. Now, if we tack across to the other side of the chart, where we would find the solar return descendant, we can see that solar return Jupiter is quite closely conjunct this point. So we have an emphasis here of that Jupiter-Chiron symbology. It could indicate that Jupiter, with its connection to law and justice, is arousing a hurt or a wounding, something which is paining Donald. Perhaps he perceives something which seems manifestly unjust to him. And the return Jupiter on the return descendant could also be suggestive of his legal representation. The plot thickens because that solar return midheaven with Uranus and Mercury are all in the area of Trump's natal Mercury. And this combination squares the returns ascendant descendant and Trump's natal stellium of Neptune, Chiron, Jupiter. Leaping briefly into the current year of 2024, you may recall that on the day that Trump was convicted in the hush money trial, transiting Uranus and Mercury were quite closely conjunct his midheaven. So this gives us an idea of the startling news and revelations that can come about under that combination of Uranus, Mercury and midheaven. Returning to the Converse year, we can see that this theme is repeating itself. The disruption that is experienced is arguably worse because of those simultaneous squares being made out to the returns ascendant. It's Jupiter and Neptune, and of course Trump's natal stellium. The solar return moon is on the returns Chiron, and so we're seeing a repetition of this Chironic theme of being wounded or hurt. We can also see that both that moon and Chiron are square to Donald's natal sun. So we have further warning of a hurt, a painful inadequacy, a lack of emotional equilibrium, and a dissatisfaction. Solar return Saturn is square to the natal ascendant and also to that natal Mars. So we have some more difficulty being suggested here. There could be hard work. There's likely restriction. We could find that limits are being placed on our will and our pursuit of our goals. We could find our actions curtailed, and we might not be able to go for what we want in a free and unimpeded manner. Lastly, we have that Pluto and Mars of the return hovering a few degrees away from the natal midheaven. We're not talking a close conjunction here, and the pair are not tightly interwoven with Trump's natal planets. So it's suggestive of that deep and exhaustive determination, a relentless pursuit, but not necessarily a victory. So let's turn now to the tools of converse progressions and converse solar arcs. And let's double check that we're on the right path by seeing how these were working back in 2016 when Trump was elected president. Now, both the methods of progressions and solar arcs are a long-standing and very successful predictive tool. And the progressed planets are displayed around the outside of the chart in green. The solar arc planets are displayed outside too, but they are blue. And we want to see if there was any significant activity going on in these measurements in 1876. We do need to be aware that when we look at progressed planets, if they do form aspects with the natal chart, then we need to carefully assess what relationship they were in, because sometimes we may see a square or opposition aspect that looks stressful. But if we turn back to the natal chart and these two planets were placed in strong positions and had harmonious aspects between them, then the progressed square or opposition, for example, may well manifest in a positive event. I'm saying this because in this progressed chart, we can see that the progressed Sun is at almost 15 degrees of Aries and is separating away from a opposition to natal Chiron. If we look at the natal chart for Donald, we can see that his natal Sun is actually in a trine with natal Chiron, and that Jupiter is involved too, and so we wouldn't be alarmed. We could well interpret this as bringing an opportunity for Trump to assuage an inner wounding or hurt, and possibly something which arose in the childhood from the father or a father figure. We can also establish that that progressed Mars is still within a degree of orb to Donald's natal Saturn, but because Mars is moving backwards in converse progressions, it is separating away at speed. And if we look to the condition of Mars in Donald Trump's natal chart, it's a strong Mars, conjunct the ascendant, and in the first whole sign house. We can see his progressed moon is moving through his 10th house of Taurus and is very shortly going to actually conjunct his midheaven because it's moving backwards. But I think it's the solar arc positions that shriek of that success, determination, self-betterment. And if we look at the solar arc ascendant, it is nearby Donald's natal Sun and opposing his natal moon. In fact, it is on their midpoint. And we could see this as a most powerful aspect, speaking of a time when we can beam out our core purpose, our consciousness, our identity, our emotional expression through the ascendant, the most sensitive point in the chart. And solar arc Jupiter, planet of growth, of positivity and expansion, of success, is conjunct to our natal Pluto. This is a combination which is known for its drive for success, for seeking out plenty and abundance. And in fact, solar arc Pluto has also been sesquiquadrate that natal Jupiter, doubling this emphasis. And the same goes for the relationship between the solar arc Sun and the natal ascendant. They are in sesquiquadrate too. Solar arc Mars is slowly reversing over Donald's natal Uranus. So we have that drive, that rigidity of our willpower, the excitement and the need for change. So we have success here. We can see that this would be a year of change. And the contacts with the ascendant, the Sun and the Moon would alert us to potential changes in our role in life. And now we come to the critical year, and here we can again see the solar arcs and progressions around the outside of these natal charts. Now, can we see any signs of success in the very sensitive points, such as the ascendant and the midheaven? Do we have critical planets moving into contact with each other, indicative of success or big shifts in life? We do have an aspect being formed with the progressed Sun. We have to remember that that progressed Sun is moving backwards, and what it is doing is entering into an opposition with natal Neptune. This is not a good sign in an election year. There isn't a strong natal aspect between these two planets, and Neptune tends to introduce confusion, a blurring of boundaries, illusion and delusion, loss, and so this isn't particularly positive. If we look at progressed Mars and progressed Venus, they are moving into square position. They are in orb now, and because both these planets are actually slowly moving backwards, Venus, the faster moving planet, will soon perfect that square. These two planets together can be symbolic of our desire nature, but equally they can be symbolic of discord. And Venus is not well situated in Donald's natal chart. His Mars is strong, but his Venus is not. And so there is a conflict or tension here. We may not be getting our own way, and we won't be feeling peaceful or harmonious about this either. There is a lesser progression being made, but it is being made between two important points. If we look at the progressed ascendant, it's at 26 degrees and 52 of Gemini. What this means is that it is in a sextile aspect with Trump's natal Mars, that Mars which is such a strong and positive force in his life. Natally, these 2 points, the ascendant and Mars, are both in conjunction, so that we have that tight natal relationship, and it is repeating itself in the progressions, and so that's a positive. We have that strong expression of our will, the ability to impose our wants and needs on the environment around us. This is certainly an aspect working in Trump's favour. And let's turn to the solar arc aspects and see if they reinforce this dynamic expression of our energy. Now that solar arc midheaven is sesquiquadrate to natal Saturn, and this implies that our midheaven role, our reputation, our career is going to be subject to some kind of restrictment or steadying, for better or for worse. But if we look at Donald's natal chart, that Saturn is in poor condition. It's in Cancer and in the 12th, and is one of the Achilles heels in his chart. And this also doesn't bode well for the few months leading up to November 2024. Moreover, it will be many months after the election before the overhanging shadow of this Saturn midheaven contact has moved out of a degree orb. We can see that that solar arc true node is just around a degree away from opposing the natal Neptune. And so on balance, the only aspect made in the converse directions and progressions that would benefit Trump are that sextile that is slowly forming between the ascendant and Mars. Now, as things stand, I haven't seen enough to persuade me that the November election is going to be successful for Trump. I suspect the months between now and November are going to bring some startling changes. But what I want to do now is return to the current time, here in 2024, and to look at Donald's solar return in relation to his natal planets and make sure nothing has been missed. We know that if we were using perfections, Trump is currently in a 6th house year, and his 6th house is ruled by Saturn. His Saturn is not in good natal condition, as we've already discussed, so this is a minus. But even when Trump moves into his 7th perfected house this June, although the 7th house is angular and stronger, it is still nonetheless ruled by Saturn. And of all the places in Donald's birth chart where we would look for self-undoing, prisons, hospitals, poor mental health, we would of course be looking at his 12th whole sign house, where Saturn is conjunct with Venus. Now, to return to this solar return chart, can we see anything that would make us believe success was on the horizon? If we start with the angles, we can see that his natal midheaven is receiving that conjunction from transiting Uranus. Many viewers have been keen to point out that the fixed star Algol is there too, and we know that that transiting Uranus was already in orb when he was convicted. Now we can see that the solar return Jupiter is nearby, but it is still a good 10 degrees away from Uranus, and so I don't believe this is going to be particularly relevant. If we look at the midheaven of the solar return, we can see that it is kind of on the midpoint of solar return Saturn and solar return Neptune. I don't see this as a good sign. I do often see that Neptune and Saturn hover around a point when they are going to be breaking it down and reformulating it, because Neptune dissolves and blurs the boundaries that Saturn is about. And so this combination makes me think of uncertainty, of change, of uneasiness. And we can also see that that same Saturn is forming a square to the natal Uranus-Sun-Moon combination. Solar return Venus is on the Sun, and that's a good sign. But it is also square to that Neptune, the midheaven, and the Saturn. The ascendant of this solar return is actually going to fall into Trump's natal 12th house. So this is bringing 12th house matters very much to the fore. And it's in a rather tight square with that natal Chiron. Now, we've already seen that Trump's natal sun is going to be squaring the Saturn of the solar return. And it's quite a tight square because that Saturn is at 19 odd degrees of Pisces. And Sun squaring to Saturn would indicate alienation. There's a deprivation there. But what is the solar return moon telling us? That's at almost 15 degrees of Virgo. And so there's a wideish square with his natal sun moon. But what we have to be particularly alert to is that this moon is in a very much tighter square with his natal Uranus. And this is a big drawback because it tells us that the coming 12 months are going to contain an element where our emotions are disrupted. They're shocked. And the experience will be most unsettling and jarring for us. Now, we know moon represents our emotions. It can often represent the family, and it can also often represent the home. And so the more I look at this solar return, the less optimistic I feel for Trump. There is so very little positive going on for him during the coming 12 months. And so I haven't changed my original conclusion that he is not in a strong position this November. I will look more closely at his position around the time of sentencing. We'll see what his chances of being let off the hook are. Will he be able to continue with his campaigning activities? Thank you for accompanying me on that journey. Regardless of which side of the political fence you sit on, I'll see you soon. Do take care. God bless you and your families.